I'm Charles Lenchner. I'm part of People for Bernie, and I'm here with an amazing group of panelists to talk about climate, the Democratic National Convention, Democratic National Committee, the things that happened or didn't happen. To answer really the question is, where are we on climate policy and the Democratic Party at this time? And we're lucky to have some wonderful people. I'll introduce them very briefly, and they can do more when they're up. But we have Michelle Deatrick, who is part of the DNC's Council on the Environment and Climate Crisis. We have Dharna Noor, a journalist with Earthist. We have Anthony Rogers Wright, who is a well-known environmental justice advocate who kind of shows up wherever there's action going on. And we're going to be joined by R.L. Miller, who's the founder of Climate Hawks Vote, and is also an activist in the California Democratic Party and an elected member of the DNC from California. So thank all of you for joining us. And we're gonna just get right into it and start off by asking Michelle to sort of explain what this presentation you're gonna show us is. Give us some context and we'll get right to it.
Great, thank you so much for having me here, Charles. It's an honor to be here with Dharna and Anthony. I'm Michelle Deatrick. I'm the chair of the DNC Environment and Climate Crisis Council, which was just established in late 2019. And the purpose of it is to build on the environmental party movement within and outside the Democratic Party and advocate for really truly bold, authentically bold, comprehensive environmental policy. And just a little background, you may remember when the DNC did not vote to have a climate debate, and that really created the political opening for us to establish the council. We've been pushing for it for almost a year, and we were able to get it passed eventually with support from DNC leadership, but also with the help of groups like Sunrise and Our Rev and Greenpeace and 350 and Climate Hawks and lots of others. This was, like so much of the work we do, it took a village. And so I want to be sure to acknowledge that. And so that's kind of the context for the work that we're doing. And I wanted to share a couple slides just to kind of help with getting a better understanding of what we're doing, because we have lots of goals and a lot of it surrounds the platform and policy, but we have broader goals. So even once this platform, DNC 2020 platform, which will be our platform for the next 4 years, is approved, we're not going away. The fight, as you know, is a much bigger fight. So we are fighting for more participation by people who are environmental justice and climate activists in the electoral process, and also crucially by people in the frontline communities that are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So voting, but also leadership positions, running for office. We're trying to make sure that our Democratic Party caucuses and councils in all 57 states and territories. And then we're going to network them so we have a stronger voice going forward. And right now, we're focusing on Democratic Party policies and laser focused on the 2020 platform. We are a diverse and inclusive group, both in our leadership and in terms of the people who help develop our recommendations for the 2020 platform, by age, by geography, by race, by expertise. So, and this is just a fraction of the people and the organizations that help to create our recommendations for the 2020 platform. So the process of creating recommendations for the platform was months long. We went on a national listening tour, which started out being in person and it's gone virtual for obvious reasons. And we consulted with lots of NGOs and allies, to make sure that we were listening broadly and deeply and living our values. And we learned a lot in the process. So, our view is that we're going to have to rebuild our economy after the pandemic, after the economic crisis. We need to rebuild our society and our culture. We need to confront environmental racism, white supremacy. And we can do all of this in, propping up the old fossil fuel economy that is devastating our planet and our future, or we can build a sustainable green future that's equitable and that works for everyone. So through the process of this inclusive process, we created 12 pages of platform recommendations, and they're centered around 3 principles, which are build a green economy and empower workers, create a just transition for displaced workers, but also crucially for those communities impacted by the climate crisis, declare a climate emergency and the fossil fuel era, and achieve net zero, not actually it's supposed to say near zero. That's a typo. We want near zero emissions by 2040, and also center environmental justice with 40% of climate environmental spending going to frontline communities. So those are just some highlights, obviously, because we have a 12-page document. But so I wanted to talk a little bit about the creation of the Democratic Party platform, because it's a Byzantine organization, and so much of what happens is sort of in this black box. It doesn't get a lot of media attention, so I'm really grateful for this evening. I'm going to talk about the longer process, but we have a unique opportunity in the next 8 days to actually impact the outcome of this process, which will be the Democratic Party's platform for the next 4 years. And first I want to say, sort of not the elephant in the room, because we need the donkey in the room, I guess, is like, why do platforms matter? And they do matter. It's actually really interesting historically to see how platforms track with what the party actually does during those 4 years, particularly if there's a Democratic president. But it can also be a tool, if we get a good progressive one, for advocating. I very recently served as a county commissioner, and on a couple occasions, I was able to say to fellow elected leaders, how can you not be for this? It's in our Democratic Party platform. And it actually was very persuasive. I think it's an underused tool and one that we could leverage going forward. But first, we have to get the policies that we need in it. So, little history. The 2012 DNC platform, out of over 40 pages, had half a page on climate and environment and upheld clean coal. By 2016, we did a lot better. We had 3 pages out of 45. And now we're turning to 2020. So the way this works is there's a platform drafting committee, which was 15 people. And they already voted and approved a draft on July 15th. We haven't seen that draft. It hasn't been made public yet. Then there's a larger platform committee, 187 people, who are elected out of the states. So they carry that wide geographic expertise, which is so crucial to creating really good policy. And I was actually elected to that platform committee, and we will be voting on July 27th to approve a platform. Now, going alongside this complementary were the Biden-Sanders task forces, which met on 6 different topics, including immigration, criminal justice reform, healthcare, climate, education, and economy. I think I got all 6. And they came out with a set of recommendations about 2 weeks ago. So those recommendations have the same formal status as the recommendations that the Climate Council came out with. Informally, I expect them to be very influential. But again, we don't know because we haven't seen the actual draft of the platform, which we're going to be voting on the 27th. But on the 27th, people on the platform committee have the opportunity to bring amendments and to make changes. And so we've really been focusing on what those might be. I'm going to stop the share for a little bit and go back to addressing you directly, because I want to talk about what are we focusing on at the council. Would that be helpful, Charles? Just talk about like what amendments we're looking for. So we're operating in a black box because we don't know what the draft is, right? But we have some expectations about that it'll look a lot like the Biden-Sanders task force reports informed by the vice president's, just this week, he came out with climate and green economy proposals. So we expect it'll be informed by that as well. So we really want to focus a lot on reducing fossil fuel extraction, because that is not a feature of either of those proposals. And that's really different than increasing renewables, because you can increase the amount of renewable energy in the economy and still have the same or even increased fossil fuel extraction, because the natural gas companies, natural gas, I say with quotes, because arsenic is also natural, they're really focusing now on producing plastics instead. So we could end up with lots of renewable energy and still this horrible fossil fuel economy. So specifically, the 2016 platform commits to ensuring the fracking, quote, will not take place where states and local communities oppose it. That's huge, right? When you think about all the pipeline fights we've had in this country, if we'd had a Democratic president who was held to that for the last 4 years, we'd be in a really different place right now. We want to make sure that carries forward from the 2016 platform. And it's not in the Biden campaign's new climate proposals, nor is it in the task force report. And by the way, I would add tribes, where states, tribes, and local communities oppose it. Another one we really want to be sure of is an end to fossil fuel leasing on public lands. Now, to his credit, Vice President Biden has committed to this, but is not in the task force report. We want to make sure it is in there, and that's huge, actually. Out of fossil fuel production, 40% of over 40% of coal, about 25% of crude oil, over 10% of natural gas is produced on public lands and waters. So we could cut U.S. CO2 emissions producing extraction by about a quarter just with that. So we want to make sure that campaign promise gets put in the platform, because what that does is it's not just holding the vice president to it, who's already committed, but all the other Democrats up and down the ballot. Another thing we're really focusing on in our thinking is agriculture, which gets ignored in so many climate plans and is really not addressed in either of these in a substantive way. And so we're working with some of the great non-NGO small farm ag organizations to try to figure out exactly a really targeted one there. So you can probably hear we're being strategic. We'll make the big asks too. We need to ban fracking. We need to stop all new fossil fuel permitting. There are the asks that we have to make because they're right. And then there are asks that, like, we have a lot of leverage and we think we're really likely to be able to get them passed. So that's kind of, there's lots more in the air, but again, until we see a draft, it's kind of hard to throw a bunch of amendments up there, which may or may not be necessary, and hopefully won't be all necessary. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you so much for that. That's a great presentation. I just want to ask, you've clearly been active on this around the DNC for some time. How do you note whether we're advancing or retreating? What's the metric that we should be using to evaluate where the DNC is right now?
Where the DNC is right now? That's a really good question.
I'm sort of, just to be clear, I'm sort of fishing.
Maybe the Democratic Party,
Democrat, yes.
Yeah, the DNC is so many pieces, right? And we talk about it as one thing, but there's the leadership and then there's the members. And I'm seeing an increase in over time as, people come moving out of the DNC and we see the newly elected people starting to come in. I think that it is reflecting the sentiment of a lot of active Democrats, which is we are moving left on a lot of issues, I would say particularly on healthcare. And we're seeing that play out, I think, in this process. And I think we're also seeing people come to a recognition about climate. I think there's a lot of learning to do, which actually brings me to some of my asks because I'm an organizer and I never come unprepared without an ask. So I'm going to share my There we go. Everyone can see that, right? So, we've got 8 days. And there are specific things you can do that do not take a lot of time, but that would be really, really helpful. We have a petition, and actually between some of our partner organizations have been helping us gather signatures. We are about to get over 20,000 all told. That would be a really nice number. We would be able to probably, get some media attention out of that. So sharing and signing it. And if you are a delegate in particular, when you go to the petition, to dncclimate.org/endorsements. There's a special form for you to sign. You sign that one, and we will be able to be in touch with you to be able to let you know what are the amendments that we're pushing once we get to that point. And so you can ask questions and have input. So super helpful. If you have elected officials who you think would sign on to our letter for electeds and former electeds, that would be terrific. And there's a final ask, which isn't on there. But I wrote an article, which is at our website, dncclimate.org/news. It's my statement on the Biden-Sanders task force recommendations, and includes a lot of what I've been talking about, specific things that we really need to push for. And for now and for the long term, we need to all be helping one another to learn about the difference between near zero and net zero, about carbon offsets and carbon sequestration, some of the really troubling proposals that are becoming part of the policy air and part of what people are talking about as answers to climate change, and they're not. So, reading that, sharing it, I think is super helpful because, we're fighting for next week, but this is also a long game.
I get it. Thank you so much. I understand that you have to rush off for a previous engagement. So thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much. So good seeing you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick note for Daniel, who's helping us with the tech. We need you to look at the chat box. Thank you. And now I want to turn first of all to Dharna, who's a climate reporter at Earthist. Dharna, is there anything that you were thinking about as you were watching Michelle's presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Charles. Just a quick note, it's Earther, which is Gizmodo's climate vertical. Yeah, I mean, I guess, it's sort of to get it out of the way, I'm really struck by how far the climate conversation has come in 4 years. As Michelle laid out so brilliantly, just 4 years ago, there were only few paragraphs devoted to climate at all in the DNC platform, and I think this time around, if that happens, folks really aren't going to stand for it. That said, I think there's so much more to look for to see what someone's climate impact is going to be as president or as somebody else in power beyond the limits of these sorts of plans. So, that means looking not only to, as Michelle just said, looking to someone's plan to phase out fossil fuel completely, which, this plan that the DNC Environment Council put forth does include a plan to do so. Joe Biden's climate plan does not include a plan to do so. But also other things like, what's Joe Biden going to do on trade? We know that NAFTA, for instance, was a huge incentivizer of, expanding the energy industry, expanding big agriculture, both of which are huge, huge emitters, are terrible for the climate, and by the way, also terrible for frontline communities who are so much worse impacted by, by pollution and et cetera. What's Joe Biden's policy going to be on war? We know that the military is the single biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, huge user of fossil fuels. And, this week on Capitol Hill, there's a vote coming up to defund the Pentagon budget by 10%. I think it's really important to look even beyond the scope of these plans to see where folks are going to be headed in terms of climate in so many other places. And the last thing I want to point out is that, it's really easy for Joe Biden to be pushed on his climate policies, not to at all discount the work that activists and others are doing to push him forward. And I think it's really important to note how far the DNC has come in these past 4 years. But there's other places where I think, he could use a lot more pushing. And one is on his advisory board. For instance, is Joe Biden really going to adhere to his commitments to, not just, not let alone like phasing out of fossil fuels, but even just to boost more renewable energy. If he's being advised by folks like Ernie Moniz, who worked under Obama as energy secretary and was a huge supporter of, for instance, exporting more crude oil, or Heather Zeichel, who after she worked under Obama was on the board of 10-Year Energy, or Larry Summers, the noted economist who notoriously said in a memo that Africa was underpolluted, and again, a huge supporter of crude oil exports, of expanding the fossil fuel industry. So, yes, there has been so much progress that's been made, but I think it's important to remember how deep these ties are, and really how easy it is to see the number of ways that that Biden is kind of compromised when it comes to even talking about climate. Like, if he really wants to make a commitment, I think he should not only be improving these climate plans, but also kind of putting his money where his mouth is when it comes to advisors, et cetera.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anthony, I'm going to go to you in a second, but I just want to note that RL has joined us. She's on mute now in case you're saying hi. We're going to turn to you in just a little bit. But Anthony, before we go there, you listened to that presentation. We're looking at someone deeply involved in how to make the Democratic Party stand up for climate in the best possible way. What are your comments about those efforts?
Yeah. First of all, really great to be here. Thanks for having me, Charles. Always great to share space with my sisters, Dharna and RL. And I think that just like we have to give so much props to Michelle Deatrick and just the incredible work that she has done to move the Democratic Party from where it was in 2016. I was in Orlando when we were fighting over that platform that it was pretty horrendous, to be honest. We couldn't get a ban on, Dharna talked about trade, horrible ideas like TPP. It's depend on Trump to end that, actually. And also issues like fracking. We weren't able to get clarity on nuclear energy. So I think that, the work that Michelle did in cooperation and consultation with people like myself, people like RL, and the leaders that she mentioned, it's just absolutely incredible to get us to a point where it's not such like a big launch pad, should Biden get elected. That said, I do have to agree with everything that Dharna said, that there are some inconsistencies. There seems to be a proclivity for a lot of candidates to say the three magic words, Green New Deal, and that automatically gave them some sort of climate justice cred or some climate champion cred. But the fact of the matter is that due to the fact that the Green New Deal hasn't been fully reified of like what qualifies for Green New Deal and what does not. As Dharna said, Joe Biden can get away with that as much as Pete Buttigieg could, while also, not supporting an outright ban on fracking, while also supporting what, my organization refers to as false solutions, including carbon markets, carbon offsets, which, do horrific things to indigenous sovereignty and don't work. They're not, it's been proven not to work. Cap and trade schemes. And then even more troubling is this reliance on unproven technologies like so-called industrial carbon capture and sequestration or air capture. The other thing is that, we focus a lot, I don't know how it became the vernacular of mainstream enviros, but like we say carbon all the time. And we don't actually want to decarbonize fully because that would be like Thanos like snapping his finger, right? Like we are made up of carbon. But what we really want to do is defossilize. And so we haven't seen Joe Biden talk about, other criteria pollutants and PFAS, a little bit on PFAS, but there's methane, and methane is 180 to 100 times more heat trapping in the short term than carbon dioxide. And with the amount of time that we have apparently left to avoid breaching the 1.5 degrees centigrade threshold, that short term heat increase is a really, really big deal. So I would say that, also to Dharna's point, like who Vice President Biden. I do know some incredible people who've definitely been advising him, including Catherine Coleman Flowers, Varshini from Sunrise, who was mentioned before, and of course, Representative Ocasio-Cortez. That said, we definitely need to see a lot more indigenous representation. We need to see a lot more frontline representation, Black, Brown, and immigrant communities, farm workers who have just been, rendered ineffable in this, even though they're considered criteria workers, don't have a seat at the table, either because of their immigrant status or just because of how they're extracted from. So I'd really love to learn more about who is like advising Biden and who will be should he get elected. And then we also have to see him really get into some specifics, because the macro talk of just trying to maybe like appease and mollify the concerns of progressives won't work in the context of racial justice, and it won't work in the context of climate change. So we're going to have to see a lot more specifics.
Thank you. And RL, we're going to turn to you now. So if you or Danielle can unmute you, we saw a presentation from Michelle about the DNC's Council on the Environment and the Climate Crisis. And we know you weren't there for that, so I can't ask you specifically. But I am going to ask you, can you give us an overview of the platform process so far and next week from your vantage point as an elected DNC member who's paying close attention and cares about the climate?
Hey, folks, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So I am phoning in from my vacation because this is so important to me that I'm taking, I arranged a bunch of hikes around this. So thank you for listening to me. And if the cell phone if the reception gets bad, it's because there's a lightning storm on the way. So I am a newly elected DNC member. I don't officially.
All right, we just lost you. I have a concern that the reason we lost her is that she's on vacation in the mountains, and the place where she thought she had cell service didn't have as good cell service. So if she comes back, we're gonna bring her back to finish answering that. But in the meantime, back to you, Anthony. From what you've said, it sounds like there's an argument over like the modalities for addressing the climate change, and the frontline communities have lost the argument in the Democratic Party, which is weird. Because if I remember correctly, it was people of color in the Democratic Party who essentially gave Biden the job. So what explains the disconnect? That's part one. And secondly, what do you think it's going to take to change that?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's important, just like with any, climate community, that we're not a monolith, right? So there are some folks who do represent frontline communities that aren't adverse to market-based solutions, and so those happen potentially to be the ones who have Biden's ear. That said, I would agree with you that there does seem to be a disconnect in the sense that the people who, of course, specifically Black people, South Carolina obviously is what saved Biden's political career, and it's interesting that even in his he talks about agriculture in his climate platform, but there's no mention of reparations, quite frankly, for Black farmers who were absolutely just screwed by the USDA as part of his agricultural platform. So I think that, just with anything else, that what separates people is that you do have a class of folks who claim to be accountable to frontline communities that are quite accommodationist, in that regard. It breaks my heart to say this, but a lot of those people are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, to be really, really honest, who are still on this idea that we can defeat the climate crisis through peak incrementalism, when that's just simply not the case. And you would think that also, I mean, you want to keep the voters who are responsible, who would be responsible for getting you elected, as healthy as possible, up until November 3rd. And the fact of the matter is that, while, there are some things that we can definitely celebrate in his latest $2 trillion plan, but at the same time, there's not enough that's going to protect your most important voting block, especially when you add in the fact of COVID-19. Most of these people, Jackie Patterson from the NAACP, who's brilliant, hired basically by NAACP to tackle climate change and environmental justice, released a report called Cold-Blooded a couple of years ago, that basically just broke down that if you are Black, you have a much higher chance of being situated near a coal-fired power plant. Add COVID-19 to that, and there's massive death that's awaiting that. So I would say, just like with anything else, it's just like there are certain people who are handpicked, by the DNC as sort of like the EJ representatives, the Black people that you have to speak to, and they have the access. What we need to have more representation of is the grassroots, the people who are on the ground every single day, who are accountable to their communities, who work directly with their communities. No buffers, no foundations can take them away from their communities. And the nonprofit apparatus also contributes to that by sort of saying to Joe Biden, potentially, this is the Black person, this is the brown person, this is the Native person that you should be speaking to, and therefore that counts as representation. That's extremely problematic. Obviously, again, the EJ community is not monolithic, and the DNC has to understand that.
Thank you very much. RL seems to be back. RL, can you unmute yourself? There we go. So RL, the environment of your cell phone took you away from us. Please resume.
Okay. Hey, folks. So here's going to say, this is not a horrible platform, but first off, because I've been out of touch for so long, my first question is, have they released this publicly to us peons, or is the platform going to remain a mystery until Friday or Saturday, the way they did last time around? If anybody knows the answer to that, you can type it in chat, but I won't see it. So obviously, what we need to do is get some solid platform amendments in, even if we don't know exactly what the platform looks like. My best guess is that the platform is going to the draft platform is going to look something like a cross between the Biden Clean Energy 2.0 plan and the Biden-Bernie Unity Task Force report. And I think it's going to keep in the good work of Varsha at Sunrise with the clean electricity by 2035, and that's awesome. It's not going to probably say very much about cars, and I think we all need to keep on hammering about cars. And then my main criticism of this, I have two major criticisms. First off, Biden campaigned on phasing out fossil fuel production on public lands and waters. That means our coal mines in our great big coal holdings in Wyoming and Montana, our offshore oil in the Gulf of Mexico. And Biden campaigned on ending no new permitting on those lands. And that's not in the platform. And that needs to be put in because the platform is supposed to look like the nominee's values. And if the nominee is dropping it, we need to make a big fuss about it. Second thing is that the platform does not respect science if it doesn't mention 1.5 degrees. And there's lots of reasons why we need to talk about 1.5 degrees Celsius, because that is the limit that the United Nations have all agreed to respect. That's in the Paris Agreement. Biden said he wants to return the United States to the Paris Agreement. That means he wants to return us to he wants to get the world to no more than 1.5 degrees of warming. And so I think it's real important that if a candidate is going to be campaigning on science, they need to respect the science, which is to say include a promise to 1.5 degrees, no more, no less. I am deeply worried that right now I think Michelle has probably gone over this, right now there's way too much in the way of promising carbon capture and sequestration, which is to say another way to keep on with the drilling and the fracking and the mining that is making frontline communities sick, while at the same time giving all the rest of us a magic pill that will keep us all thin, rich, and beautiful forever. Don't believe the bullshit on carbon capture and sequestration. Push for 100% renewable energy, not just renewable electricity, but also a renewable energy powered transit system. And that means electrifying everything from buses, where the Biden platform is very good, to electrifying passenger cars and phasing out fossil fuel powered cars. And the platform is not good on that at all. We'll be offering amendments in the next few days. Stay with us. You can follow me on Twitter, RL_Miller. And I'll try to do more later.
Excellent. I have one follow-up question for you. So, a lot of the more call it street thirsty activists are sad about the DNC not really having a physical presence this year, because it takes away the ability of delegates to do some small d democracy. It takes away the ability of folks traveling to Milwaukee to have demonstrations and interventions that capture the media and focus attention on communities or issues that aren't being prioritized enough. All that's gone. Do you have advice aside from these, this amendment process, which is over next Monday? How can people who are trying to use the DNC event as a hook to get the people's voices heard? What are they supposed to do now? What are the options that exist?
It's got to be online activity. That means that if you see a petition, I know that people are sick and tired of signing petitions, but if you see a petition coming from Climate Hawks Vote or one of the other groups that's deeply involved in this, please get those petitions in. What I'm going to do is put out a petition going to Michelle Deatrick, because Michelle, you sit on the platform committee, and you can go report to the platform committee that 5,000 people, 10,000 people, 50,000 people have signed a petition demanding a pro-science platform, and the DNC needs to respect the science. So yeah, online activities. You're good at memes, you're good at Twitter. This is the time to step it up. I wish there was more I could do. I was planning a long trip to end up in Milwaukee. I was planning to print out lots of I'm a climate voter buttons like we did in 2016, but yeah, life got in the way.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. And as Brett Banditelli reminds us, no war, but me more.
And Brett's very good at it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to I'm not kicking you off. If you stick around, that'd be great.
Awesome.
Dharna, I want to turn to you again. So, you're on this panel not as a fellow climate activist, but as a journalist. So, can you give us a sense of what are we looking for? The DNC is going to come and go. There's going to be an election campaign, and many people are hopeful that Biden will replace Trump. But what happens then? What can climate activists expect? What should they do in those first 100 days? Are they going to take the Biden promises or the platform promises at face value and say, great, we're going to now watch you enact what you promised? What are the leverage points for us to think about now to advance this issue in the first 100 days of the new administration?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I certainly don't think that, any of the folks who we're talking about in this movement have any plans to take any of this at face value. In the first 100 days, though, seeing as the pandemic is still looking like it's going to be weathering on, I'd really love to see some real commitment from the Biden campaign to really investing in a green stimulus. And there's, big ways, of course, that needs to happen. We have like this incredible opportunity while oil and gas demand are tanking we could nationalize the fossil fuel industry and phase it out. But there are smaller things that we could do too. There was just a new report today from Columbia University that showed that we could create over 100,000 jobs by creating a public jobs program just to help phase out abandoned oil and gas wells. Right now, we're seeing like just record amounts of bankruptcy in the oil and gas industry amid tanking demand. And that would be kind of, a way that maybe not an easy way, but a relatively small way that I think Biden could really show that he's serious about taking care of the folks who, as you've mentioned, really made sure that he was in office. And there's lots of other, huge kinds of proposals, nationalizing the fossil fuel industry, completely changing our agricultural sector to look for. But there's smaller ones too. And I think that in those first 100 days, he's really going to show, whether or not he's willing to put it out there and really stand up for these things. The other thing is, as RL mentioned, I think that many have been really frustrated to see a lack of focus on transportation from Joe Biden. And right now, amid the pandemic, I think that there's a lot of concern about riding public transportation, understandably, of course. But I think that right now we'll see that if we reify this dependence on more highways and things like that, if we focus on expanding highways, put more cars onto the streets, we're going to see a lot more potential for the same kinds of respiratory illnesses and respiratory conditions that make particularly poor Black and brown folks in the United States so much more vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19 and so many other health issues. So, there's a lot that I think we could expect to see from him in the first 100 days. No, I definitely don't think that anyone's taking it at face value, but there's a lot that he could do.
Got it. Anthony, I want to pick on you for a second. We activists on the left have a long history of being ignored and dismissed by the powers that be, including inside the Democratic Party. And that frustration is part of what fueled Bernie Sanders' rise. It looks like he has really helped secure an amazing victory on an important issue. With all due respect to the limitations of the policy specifics that Michelle and RL were sharing, we are, assuming a Biden presidency comes out of this, we're far ahead in terms of the public commitments being made by the next president. And we understand, this is very clear, that a lot of those commitments, some fraction of those commitments, are the result of the Bernie Biden committees. They're the result of having, AOC and a Sunrise person, be on the committee making these things. So can you just give a shout out of, a praise for people who took the system as it was and worked it as hard as they could and got something out of it? And maybe that could sort of balance out the shaken fist.
Absolutely. I mean, the DNC establishment is definitely shook right now. In addition to the momentum of the movement that Brother Bernie started, that we're the old saying is like sometimes you don't live to see what you started. So maybe Bernie isn't going to be president, but what he started and almost has become decentralized. We can see the fruits of that labor. Jamal Bowman being a perfect example. It's continuing, right? Jamal Bowman ran on a Green New Deal and a bunch of other considered radical stuff, and knocked off I believe 16-term congressman. Right. So I definitely would give a shout out to the Sunrise Movement, Barshini, Will Lawrence, Evan Weber, that sit-in Pelosi's office, which seems so long ago, was also a spark. And it was also a spark in the sense that, we decided collectively not to make the same mistakes as an environmental community that we did with Waxman-Markey. There were some bumpy aspects of the rollout of the Green New Deal resolution. And those bumpy roads have been smoothed over with frontline communities, with grassroots organizations. And the results of that has been what, all of the progress that we've seen in the Biden-Bernie Unity Task Force. So Catherine Coleman Flowers, rural Alabama, African-American woman, Alabama Center for Rural Enterprises, almost single-handedly bringing attention to wastewater and sewage issues in rural Black Alabama, which made it onto the Biden Unity Task Force because Bernie went down to visit Miss Kathy. And to this day, he says that when he went to Lowndes County, he saw what he saw. He is still moved. He's still moved by what he saw, and we have to act. So this is also a result of the left finally kind of getting its shit together, honestly, and understanding that, as Dr. Cornel West reminds us, you have to have an inside and an outside game. So that, there used to be this idea, it's not woke to speak to the suits, it's not woke, but those people are too woke to win. And as I like to say, and in addition to Sunrise, so many groups, Climate Justice Alliance, R.L. Miller, it's just been at it for so long. And I'm just happy to see her getting the props that she's deserved for years, quite frankly, of really, and not only infiltrating, but agitating, from the inside and being so relentless about it, being an incredible ally to frontline communities, making sure also that hey, it's not so much that if you your plan is inadequate, if you're not listening to the front lines, if the front lines aren't at the table, but RL and people like Dharna as well has helped us spread the message that if your plan is illegitimate if it doesn't include frontline Biden and frontline input. And Sunrise understands this, and even some of the bigger Greens are really starting to understand that more, working with people like Moving for Black Lives. So I have a lot of love for the people who worked on this. Again, we know that we can go much, much further, and we will. To your point about the first 100 days, what we can do is just continue fighting like hell. Like John Lewis, who memory will be a blessing, said, before he died, Brother Martin's looking down on us and smiling, but he also is saying, keep it up. And I think that to Dharna's point, we're not going to take it at face value. The younger folk are ready to party, and they know that like they're not going to trust this party, like just to get their votes. And also Biden has to understand we can't let history repeat itself. If you screw us in the first 100 days, you're going to lose the House and you're going to lose the Senate in 2022. And we just can't afford for that to happen. So I think that, and that's just really due to the work of the activists. That's really due to the work of everything that, you've been doing, Charles. You mentioned, Brett, People for Bernie, really an organizing element of it that, gave rise to groups like Justice Democrats as well, who have been working relentlessly to keep this progressive infrastructure and this progressive fire burning. And, I say let's go, Godspeed, and we're going to keep going. But props to so many people. Yeah.
Thank you. RL, it's clear that the current DNC or Tom Perez or whoever seems to be in charge right now finds a robust public debate in which people inside the party take different sides to be a problem that has to be solved by not having it. Can you say something about what it would mean to change the culture in the DNC at the top? And I recognize you're a newly elected member, but you've been involved in the California Democratic Party for a very long time. What does it take culturally to shift the party from an organization that wants to do made-for-TV events as part of a campaign to a party that takes seriously its function as being the place where we talk about issues and hash them out?
I am so furious with the DNC. These YouTube things that they've been doing are performative transparency. They're not really transparent. A bunch of us were trying to reverse engineer what is in the platform by figuring out what was being amended. It didn't go very well because they weren't amending very much. It was frustrating, and the DNC is the most secretive black box body that I have ever encountered. And I say that after, a lifetime in Democratic politics. You don't know who your DNC members are in a lot of states. California, we disclose our DNC members, but in Maryland, in Florida, you practically have to go get a bill passed to find out who your DNC members are. The process for electing DNC members just varies from state to state, and it's incredibly opaque. They do not give email addresses of DNC members to other DNC members. That's how freaking secretive they are. And so I ran on the platform of telling Tom Perez to fuck off to his face. That isn't actually why I ran. I ran because I was angry about the way he handled the climate debate. But at least we forced that debate, but it took so much work just to force that debate. Yeah, we're going to fix the DNC. It's going to take a long time. If you are in a position to think about running for the DNC, plan now to run in 2024 when we're really going to need you, because it is hard to get onto the DNC. I got elected by the skin of my teeth, basically. And please get involved, demand transparency. I will do my best to be as transparent as possible. I generally start by venting on Twitter when I think that they're not being transparent. And I will keep you guys informed, and I'm not going to lie. That's all I can say. I will do my best to uphold transparency.
Thank you so much. And I want to out you for a second here for folks. You were not a vocal endorser or supporter of Bernie Sanders, were you? I'm just going to finish the thought and say, like, we're post the campaign. We're in this other phase where progressives have to unite and work together. And I just want to say it's a pleasure to be on the same side as you are in whatever issues come up next.
And in all full disclosure, I was a Warren voter. I wasn't very vocal about it, but I have a lot of friends and allies on the Bernie campaign, and I hope that we will all consider each other allies. I know that there are some people who say, oh, she wasn't OG Bernie 2016. Well, that's true, but I will be an ally, and I will be with you, and I am fighting with you.
Thank you so much. And we're gonna go now to Dharna for a last comment, as we're gonna be wrapping up shortly. What parting shot can you give us to set us in the right fighting spirit for next week when the platform is passed, and for next month when the DNC takes place?
Man, parting shot. I guess for me, I'm so struck by listening to this conversation today, being a participant today. How interesting it is to spend kind of half my time reporting on scientific studies that show the urgency of this crisis, and then talking with you all about how far the Democratic Party has come, and yet how far it is from really meeting the scale of those studies that show that we need to phase out of oil and gas by like 30% urgently. That's huge. And I'm heartened to hear and really inspired to hear so many folks who are really putting the pressure on the DNC to adhere to those studies, and also not to take these words at face value. I think that there have been some really important strides, for instance, like in the vein of environmental justice. I think that putting the pressure on in those ways is really important. I think that adhering to treaty rights is really important. And it's also really important to remember that not phasing out of the use of fossil fuels is ultimately going to be, going to have the worst effects on frontline communities, on indigenous folks, on poor folks, on folks of color all over the world, not just in the United States. I think that as we continue to see how the DNC does or does not fight for justice, I would hope that pressure to really phase out of oil and gas and coal stays on.
Thank you very much. And Anthony, what's your parting sure shot?
Yeah, I would just say that I'm super proud of the principled struggle in the street. Some of the reforms that we've seen, for instance, announced with policing, whether it's Minneapolis, Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, wasn't done with one vote being cast. It was, and it wasn't done with one organization saying like we're leading this. It was done by grassroots principled struggle in the street, and a very agitated principled struggle that's still going on in many places. I would say that that's also going to be what's necessary to push this party as we continue to kind of take it over. I agree with everything that Dharna said. We also have to be vigilant about the false solutions and market-based solutions. As Fred Hampton taught us many years ago, you cannot solve capitalism with capitalism, and get to the root causes of the climate crisis and make this party do that. The root causes of this crisis are white supremacy, patriarchy, and colonization. And until we have those serious conversations, we're not really going to address the climate crisis and dismantle it, quite frankly, like we need to. So it's going to take that inside-outside game. The only other thing I would add is beware of double speak, like net zero emissions. 10 solar panels does not offset one fracking well when you consider the amount of water and the amount of poison that does. So watch out for that. And then what I would also say is that it's really also time for a massive conversation with the grassroots, with Black and Brown indigenous people and labor groups. We're seeing labor get a bit better. To me, the other most important election is who's going to replace Trumka. Let's pray that it's Sarah Nelson because a lot of incredible things will happen with that. We need labor, and we need to work, and labor needs to work with us and also understand that when we say that we're going to dismantle the use of fossil fuels, when we say just transition, we don't mean just a transition like some of these big union groups promote. We're talking about just transition for workers and communities. So workers, the front lines have always been your friends. We just don't want you to have to make a choice between putting food on the table and sacrificing your health. And we don't want your communities to be dependent on a boom and bust system that Dharna just mentioned, where at some point, oil stocks were less than a hot dog and a six-pack of beer. So I would just say in closing, loving the young people, bless you. Keep it up. Thank you for inspiring us and holding us accountable. And I just want to say it's been a pleasure being on with you, Charles. And I'm really, really proud of my sister, R.L. Miller, who I just love and cherish so much. And we're going to keep supporting R.L.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony, Dharna, R.L., and Michelle, who's not here anymore. This was a great conversation. And thank you to all the delegates that have tuned in. And we'll see this when it goes out more broadly. Thank you so much. Good night, all.